Foreign direct investment driving development. Sustainable growth through knowledge transfer. Technology as a solution. Innovation as a way forward. Over 70 ministers, 140 countries, over 500 exhibitors, 8,000 square meters of exhibition, 15,000 businessmen and investors. The annual investment meeting, Sustainable Development through FDI-induced innovation and technology transfer.
We have about an hour. The way this session is planned is that we have the panelists address some of the issues that relate to investment incentives. We will also give you the opportunity to ask questions at the end that you can address to the individual panelists. I would like to start off with the topic of today. Incentives, I think, have been at the forefront of many political and economic debates in many countries. I think in your own countries you'll experience that there is a request from citizens, from voters, but also from ministries and parliaments to get a better understanding of why do we provide investment incentives to attract foreign direct investment. Why do we provide incentives, for instance, to only large corporations, multinationals, and not to mid-sized companies? Or why do we provide incentives to domestic companies and not to foreign ones? What's the benefit of providing incentives? Other questions relate to, for instance, would companies invest in our country even if we don't provide incentives? And what's the return on investment if you provide cash grants or tax credits or different types of incentives that relate to custom duties, exemptions, etc. How does that pay off in terms of the economic development goals we would like to achieve? So these are all questions, and I'm sure we are not able to address all of them, but this panel focuses specifically on the incentives role that they can play among corporate executives. The panel here is, for a large extent, has a corporate background, and they can highlight, the panelists can highlight how incentives play a role in corporate decision making as well. So I'd like to start off with Mr. Kai Hamrich. I've met Kai many years ago when he was a president at the World Association of Investment Promotion Agency. Very successful. I think Kai was very successful in bringing WIPA up to a very high level of professionalization, a very good association that increased its membership tremendously over the years. I've worked with him in several countries in his role as WIPA, and currently he also advises governments, but also serves on the board of directors of many Swedish-based companies, and is formerly a vice president of Saab Scania, a automotive company from Sweden. Kai, I'd like to start off with a question. From your background, from your perspective, and specifically related, for instance, to Sweden, what is your vision towards incentives? Are they important? What can you advise, for instance, the people that are here in the audience about the role incentives play?
Douglas, thank you so much, and thank you so much to AIM for the invitation. Sweden is, of course, perhaps a special case, and we all know that when it comes to attracting FDI, we talk about stability, previsibility, and transparency. All that we know. And we also know the importance of having the right infrastructure, tax regime, the workforce, and so on and so forth. Having said this, Sweden is a knowledge-based economy. We are very much focusing on advanced technologies and on talent. And we do not use the regime of incentives. In Sweden, there are no incentives. we treat foreign companies exactly the same way as we treat Swedish companies. The only exception to that, to aid and support and incentives, that is according to the rules and regulations of the European Union, and that is in very remote, isolated areas. There, both Swedish and foreign companies can receive incentives. So when I'm saying that we are not giving incentives, that is the case for Sweden. I don't make a judgment on incentives in general, because I understand there are big differences within Europe and between developed and emerging economies. So I'm just talking for Sweden. But talking for Sweden, we think that it's not necessary with incentives. It is not the incentives that make companies come to Sweden. If we manage to persuade them to come, it is because of our infrastructure, of our technologies, of our talent, and so on and so forth. So incentives play a very, very little role. For big corporations, I mean, if they can get it and they tell you we want them, but I mean, for corporations, the incentives in the end of the day are not very important. There are many other parameters who are much more important. You could also say another thing, that is that if a country or region is based on incentives, it's not always that you get the right investors. Perhaps you get investors because they want to have the incentives. But we don't want those investors. We want the investors to come because of the business case in Sweden, and not to help them as we see it, artificially. Douglas, let me finish by making a reflection, and that is within the European Union, of course, incentives are formally not permitted, because we live in an open market economy that should be transparent and where the rules of the game should be clear. So state aid is not welcome. But we know that many countries are cheating, and they give incentives and they give state aid under the cover. And now and then you might lose an investment case because of others playing that game. Okay, but we say in the shorter perspective, fine. But in a longer perspective, we say that those who are playing that game, more or less in secret, giving state aid or incentives, they do not improve their competitiveness, because they support companies who cannot attract on a sound basis, but they have to do it on another basis. And that is, in a longer perspective, good for our companies, because they have to take the rough way, where they don't get any help, and where they have to be competitive anyway. So we don't, in an artificial way, try to help our companies in that way. So when we hear about that and that company, that or that competitor out in Europe, having received that state aid, very often quite secretly, we say, fine. It will not help them in a longer perspective. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you, Kai, for that provoking opening statement. So incentives are not provided in Sweden. They're not allowed in the European Union, and the countries that provide them are cheating. I think that's a very provocative statement. Let me go to Mr. Arnold Leung. He's the CEO and founder of Appnovation Technologies. Arnold actually founded Appnovation right after his graduation from the UBC Sauder School of Business, while he was actually a finance graduate. Arnold is also the winner of the Vancouver Top 40 Under 40, which means Arnold is not yet 40 years old. Top 40 Under 40 British Columbia Business Award and the BDC Young Entrepreneur Award. He's also the board member of the Vancouver Enterprise Forum. Arnold, you manage the international operations of your company. You've expanded rapidly since you founded Appnovation Technologies. You have offices in many parts of the United States. Your head office is in Vancouver. Recently opened up an office in Wales in the UK. What's your perspective on incentives? Would you have invested in those countries if they would have not, or would have thought about providing incentives? Can you share some of your insights?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Douglas. So basically, as a company that grows about 100% a year, and being a software business means that we can be pretty much anywhere in the world. For example, as long as there's internet and there's access to a computer, our folks can program anywhere in the world. So I guess it's fairly different for us compared to a lot of manufacturers where there's a supply chain. For example, for a car company, it's going to be pretty tough for them to be in Antarctica. But for us, if there's internet and there's a computer, somebody can be programming at all times. So this creates a pretty interesting scenario where it's fairly easy for us to be anywhere in this world as long as the cost is manageable. And for us being in the creative, innovative business, it means that there's always risk in our development costs. For example, we might spend $1 million developing a piece of software. It might not work tomorrow. There might be a technological challenge or obstacle that might prevent us from launching that piece of software. So managing our costs is actually a big part of our daily operations. So what that leads to is that all these incentives, principally the cash-based rebate. For example, we got an incentive from the Welsh government to open up an R&D center there. All these incentives really help us to manage our risk and manage our costs. And to be frank, a lot of different, in most developed countries these days, they have really good access to a great labor force who knows computer science. There are a lot of schools, for example, in Europe, there are great schools in France, and Germany, and Sweden, pretty much everywhere you can think of. So access to labor is not that challenging these days because software is not rocket science anymore. There are tons of computer science grads every year. So these incentives do help a lot. And for example, the incentive offered by the Welsh government has been really helpful in allowing us to manage the cost of labor and allowing us to also manage the training costs, because training is a pretty key aspect of what we do. Being in the open source software area, we always need to train our employees for about a 4 to 5 month period before they can be pretty effective in what they're doing. So the grant that's offered by the Welsh government helps offset a lot of these costs and allows us to really be successful. And looking at what has happened in Wales, we have been able to grow from nobody to about 5 people over the last 2 months. So that's some really good progress and some really quick success there.
Thank you, Arnold. So the training grants and the incentives that offset the initial costs for you were very important to establish, for instance, in Wales and UK, right? Okay, very good. Let me introduce you to Martin Kaspar on the left of me. Martin is, as mentioned, the International Business Director of Frankischer, a German-based automotive supplier in the southern part of Germany. Martin actually holds the position of business development with the group, and after a German apprenticeship in industrial management and several years of work experience in German industry, he pursued his studies in business administration in Swindon and Oxford. In the course of his professional career, he worked on business development projects in England, where he lived for 7 years. He also has done international business projects in Mexico, France, Morocco, Romania, and India, as well as on shorter projects across Russia and the United States and the UAE. So Martin has an extensive experience in setting up greenfield facilities in the more manufacturing-driven industry, contrary to Arnold, which is talks more from a perspective on software technology companies. Martin, where do you see the mismatch between the dialogue between Mr. Hamrick saying that incentives are not provided in Sweden, Arnold putting the statement forward, yes, for us they are very crucial in the initial costs. What is your view on your years of experience?
Douglas, can I just say one thing? Sorry.
Yes.
I talked about companies up and running. I did not talk about startups. Because when we are talking about startups, of course, there are many incentives for helping those companies to get started. That's another story. Sorry.
Very good.
I think that is exactly key to the whole question. We are very much a manufacturing company, and I think that is the real key to the whole process. In terms of manufacturing, I really think I would beg to differ with Arnold. I don't think incentives really play a crucial role, or in a way any role at all. Am I potentially arguing against my own best interests here? Because as a corporate, obviously, I take money on the table, and free cash is always gratefully accepted. But do they really change my decision? Do they really change how I view a location? No, certainly not. And I think that is very much predicated on the fact that we are manufacturing. We need certain parameters, we need a certain framework, and money doesn't really come into that all that much. We want to do what we do best. We want to manufacture. So we have large sunk costs. We build factories. What is imperative for us is a long-term reliability, is long-term stability. We need infrastructure. I mean, we have materials we need to move. So roads are imperative, harbors, ports, airports. I want to be able to set up companies very quickly. I want to bring production machinery into a country. If there is a drama at the border, at the customs, every time I bring something in, the country very quickly gets slightly unattractive. And in that respect, if I can do best what we are there for, i.e. produce a product, produce automotive parts, and sell them at the highest price, that is what we are in business for, that's what we are there for. And a few €100,000 or dollars here or there don't really make the difference. If the business case doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense otherwise. And in a way I understand that it's very difficult for you as an IPA because these framework conditions are sort of a government matter. Governments sort of set the long-term framework. But on that point, I would have two things to say. You as an IPA, you are the ones who really understand the business community, or you are supposed to be the ones who really understand the business community. So you should be lobbying the government to set the framework in such a way that it is sexy for a business to invest there. And if it isn't sexy for a business to invest there, to a certain extent, I would say, well, maybe you haven't entirely done the job you ought to be doing. And the other bit is, as an IPA, you should make it as easy as possible for a company to set up. And I mean, in this conference, I heard a lot of talk about strategy and one-stop shop and all these things. And to an extent, I think these are very aspirational goals. In practice, are very often experienced in a slightly different way. Because what corporates really looking for is practical help. And in terms of corporates, I'm talking about medium-sized companies. The big multinationals probably have their own departments, but medium-sized companies really are looking for help. Because if you think about it, if you go to your country, it is an unknown unknown. I don't even know what I need to do. So the things that keep me up at night are, how do I get a production permit? Who do I need to talk to? What sort of documents do I need to provide? And I think these are the questions. And if I expect help from IPAs, that is what I would expect. Can you really tell me how I get a tax registration? Can you really tell me how I get electricity in your country? And if you sort these things, if you make it easier for corporates to set up in a quick, in a safe, in a reliable way, I think that is far more valuable than, I don't know, a few $100,000 shopped across the table.
Thank you, Martin. So what you're saying, the more soft incentives, the practical help in setting up your facilities or your business in a foreign jurisdiction makes much more sense than the grants and incentives that are provided, as well as the infrastructure developments ranging from electricity, education systems, etc., that are more relevant. So for IPAs and free zone authorities, those matters are more relevant than the cash that is provided. Let me turn to Mr. Marwan bin Yassim Al-Sakar. He's the CEO of Sharjah Investment and Development Authority, Shuruk. Let me briefly introduce him. He's also a former board member of Sharjah Tourism and Development Authority, and he's one of the key leaders in Sharjah's economic growth. He is a graduate holding a high diploma in accounting from Dubai Men's College in 1999 and has a bachelor degree in applied sciences and business administration. Mr. Marwan, from your perspective, as a CEO of the Sharjah Economic Development Authority, how do you perceive incentives? What do your companies that are investing in your jurisdiction, how do they treat your incentive package that you provide, and what forms do you provide? How does that work?
Good morning, guys. Just to check the mic. Is it working? Yeah. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. Thank you, first of all, Douglas, for having us here. Maybe I'll tell you a story, first of all, before starting about what are the incentives that we did. Before 2009, there wasn't an entity that was responsible of dealing with investors. So the issue was investors are usually coming to Sharjah, but they were losing. They were going to the municipality, they were going to the ruler's office, they were going to the planning department. By the end of the day, they don't have enough information and they leave. So in 2009, we came up with an idea of creating an entity that's going to be responsible of, first of all, providing information, which basically is a very vital, important issue here, providing information regarding Sharjah's economy, providing information regarding sectors that we would like to focus on, and most importantly, supporting them when they really need support. Who are the right people to deal with? What are the steps? What are the procedures? What are the incentives? And what can we as a government offer them to make them a successful business case? So what did we do is basically we created a whole study for the past, since 2009 till 2011, we were just studying what do we need in Sharjah, what are the sectors that we really need to focus on. And based on those sectors that we focus on currently, which is healthcare, which is travel and tourism, which is logistics and environment, we said we're going to incentivize the sectors where we really need to attract investors to. So, and how are we going to incentivize them? We're going to, first of all, provide them with the information and then provide them, supporting them with lands, and supporting with lands in a competitive rate, not giving them free lands. Because what we try to do here, we're trying to look for investors that are looking for long-term investments. We're not trying to attract investors that are looking for short-term investors. So the idea was, put Sharjah on the map, promote Sharjah internationally, try to get the investors, support them, be with them, and our channel of level of how can we send the message to the higher, to the ruler of Sharjah, which is the highest authority. It is just 3 level, which means if an investor would like to know more about Sharjah, we will study the case, we will take it over to our chairperson, from the chairperson to the ruler's office, to the ruler's decision, which means it's an easy flow, no issues, we don't have any bottlenecks that are facing. Before 2009, it was a hassle. It was so difficult for you to set up anywhere in Sharjah. So we lost a lot of investors. So what did we do? We are, for example, looking at the environmental sector. We're looking at recycling. We're looking at energy efficiencies. We try to get the investor and tell them, we have a lack of in this market, and there is a market growth rate of almost 6%, which means almost 1.5 billion dirham is expected growth rate in this sector. This is a market, so for an investor, if he knows what is the market size, he will be more incentivized rather than any other things. On the other hand, we have taxes exempt, we don't have any taxes, but the other thing, other than incentives that are important, are the trade agreements between your country and the other country. So for example, if you have someone coming from America, it's good for an investor to review those agreements between his country and the country he's going to invest in, which makes it easier for him. So those are maybe more incentivized than the IPA agencies that will provide you. On the other hand, we travel all around the globe with the Ministry of Economy to promote investing in the United Arab Emirates and investing, in my point of view, investing in Sharjah. And it's totally different from SMEs, because yes, we encourage SMEs, it's about research and development, it's about transferring knowledge, but I'm talking also about the big investors that are going to invest and build a hotel, build a hospital, infrastructure development, whether it's energy. So the main objective here for an IPA agency is to know what do you want to do, who are the investors that you're trying to get, and what are the policies and regulations that are a hurdle for him to come. And then you need to basically make it easier for it. For a country like the United Arab Emirates, there is a lot of opportunities, and that's why we can put a lot of incentives to get them. However, for other countries that are well established, you don't really need to put a lot of incentives to attract them, because everything is well established. But if, for example, in the Emirates, we don't have a lot of companies when it comes to recycling. So I would give a lot of incentives for a recycling company to come, because it's about transfer of technology, it's about a need of the market, rather than if I'm going to France where recycling is basically developed. So every country has a different KPI on providing incentives. From my point of view, if you are an IPA agency, you need to understand who are the investors you're trying to do, from where they are going to come, and how can you make it easy for them to basically set up their company without the hassle of going to a lot of unknown issues.
Thank you, Marlon. That is very insightful. So basically, to sum up, incentives can be provided when you are and can be beneficial and successful when they are provided to industries that you want to target and that where you want to build up a track record of companies that want to establish in your region within that industry, and second, take care of having the first initial soft incentives, making it much easier for companies to set up activities in your jurisdiction in the first place. Ease of registration, which was mainly the driving force behind setting up the Sharjah Economic Development Authority in the first place back in 1999. So that sort of resembles what you're saying, Martin,
yeah.
Taking care of the initial stages, and that is exactly the role that you play as an investment agency. Let me give the floor to the audience, having heard these different perspectives, different roles that incentives can play in different stages of economic development of countries, in different stages of corporate development, startup versus more established multinationals. Are there any questions? And basically is do incentives work much more efficiently in more developing and emerging economies rather than in developed economies?
That is for you to answer regarding developing economies, but I think that in developed economies, as we have said, the need for incentives is not crucial. It could even be distorted. I mean, when we are talking about investments, for example, between developed countries, developing countries, and so on, so what is important, I think, that is that the investments, as have been said, are long-term and they are based on partnerships. And that's much more important than some monetary grants.
Martin, yes, please.
On that point, on developing nations, personally, I think if there is a point of incentives, and I'd really very much doubt that, there might probably be slightly more on developed countries because they're so similar. In developing countries, the structure is highly disparate, and if you don't have the infrastructure, if you don't have the legal framework, if I don't have the sense that there is security, I mean, again, emphasizing the fact that we are manufacturing. We build factories, we put production machinery in, there's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of sunk costs. I want to be certain that this is safe today, tomorrow, and in 10 years' time. In that respect, incentives are such a marginal point. There is the fundamentals of the nation that really do impact far more, in my opinion, than anything else. So if we're talking about relativity, in very comparable nations, there might potentially be a point for incentives. But to take a business analogy, in business, if you're selling a product and if you're selling it only via price, it's very easy for your competitor to say, well, I'm 50 cents cheaper than you are, and the order might go the other way around. Companies try to differentiate themselves by the quality, by the product, by the service they're providing. If you as a nation focus your policy exclusively on incentives, it's very easy for the neighboring country to say, yep, I'll also give 25,000 per job created. But if you are specifically interested, if you're specifically sexy for an investor to go to, all of these discussions just fade out of the picture very quickly. And in that respect, I'd say, don't look at incentives as sort of a recompense for all the structures that aren't there. Focus on the structures.
Just to add on it, incentives are the last thing on the list. So after ticking off political stability, the right place to invest, the last thing is what are the incentives. It's not the first thing. You will not decide to invest in Sharjah because there are incentives. You will make sure you have a whole business case scenario that makes it a very good place to invest. Then you'll say what are the incentives. But it's not going to be the top on the list for you to decide where to invest in.
To add to this, I don't think it's actually a distinction between developed countries versus developing countries. I think it's about the size of the market. For example, for us, we expanded to the US, even though there's no incentives for us, but the US is a huge market. Being in the US allows us to really sell to a lot of companies there. So even though there's no incentives, we're still there. And I think that's true for a lot of companies, is that if your market potential is big enough, there's no need for incentives because the company can generate the profit just from operating there, and they're more than happy to pay their share of taxes, right?
Thank you. So just to briefly summarize what the panelists are mainly emphasizing is look at also the driving force behind the investment project. What is driving the specific company to invest in your country? Is it the market potential? Is it the natural resources? Is it because you have a low, highly skilled, productive workforce? These are all things that you can identify when you are talking to investors. And it would be very exceptional where you would hear a company say, it's incentives that drive us to your country. That's not the case. The CFO may emphasize that in the initial conversation, but it's not the driving force behind any investment project. I would like to give the floor to someone else. There were some other questions in the, yes, the lady here in front, please. First row, please. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Muhda Basim from the University.
Can you please speak up?
My name is Dr. Muhda Basim. I'm a lecturer at the University of Buckingham in the UK. I would like to ask you about the startup incentives that you give in Sweden and how this could be applied in the UAE. The incentives that you give to the startups, you mentioned that in Sweden you give incentives to the startups. How emerging markets can benefit from this? Thank you.
Did I understand the question right, that you're asking about the incentives we're giving to startups?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, as in most European Union countries, we have got a system for supporting startups, and that is done. You have got a number of various possibilities. You have got private funds, you have got government funds, you have got pension funds, you have got the business angels, and so on. I mean, you have got a whole series of sources supporting startups. And very many of these, for example, you have got special funds created by the government to support to support startups, because very often, I mean, government money should be complementary. Government money should not be used where private money is doing its job. So, and since private money is not always doing its job when it comes to very early startups, then the government has got a role there, and that role is taken by different funds specialized for various types of industries.
Thank you, Kai. Any other questions in the gentleman right at the back at the, yes. Can someone pass the microphone, please? Thank you.
Good morning. I'm François Giordoni from...
Please speak up because there's a lot of background.
Sorry. Good morning. I'm François Giordoni from Switzerland. I'm the venture capitalist business. It's just more a comment. I think that IPA should be more like a dating agency. And when you look at the diversity you may have between their startups, or yourself, you mentioned manufacturing, or yourself providing software in a way, demarketized type of things, and yourself saying, okay, we want to provide incentives. In Switzerland, we had different areas, different neighborhood, canton, as we say, and Geneva and other areas have incentives. When the incentives are finished, companies relocate or move to other countries. And I think, to answer to the gentleman from Uganda, I think it's very much about the business case and how you can connect the dots between either startups or companies willing to relocate because they want to manufacture something. Then you have to provide infrastructure or funds. I mean, you have to look at the business case and really connect the dots. Otherwise, you can't, like a dating agency, you cannot generalize things. You have to provide personal relationships and personal services to companies or technologies willing to come. That's my comment.
Thank you for that comment. Any other questions? I saw some other fingers going up previously. Maybe all the questions have been addressed. Gentleman here, yes.
When I was trying to establish a company in USA, so I was writing to many states that I want to establish a company. And believe me, even the Americans, even if you just tell them that you would be employing 5 persons, and this industry is there, at least 25 states replied to me that they would welcome me by all the incentives and the taxes and all the things. It is very strange what I'm listening here.
I think a very, very good comment. I think the situation in the United States is very specific. There's a lot of competition between the individual states. Texas attracting investment from California, buying away investors. It's the economic landscape in the United States focuses very much on incentives. Nevertheless, if you ask some of the companies, did they play a crucial role in their investment decision? Maybe when it comes down to comparing and benchmarking different states, because they all resemble each other very much, it did make a difference in the final decision making. And I'd like sort of Mr. Hamrick also to focus on a specific case from his background with one of the companies that he worked with. Maybe you can share that with the audience in emphasizing how incentives played a role in the investment decision-making process.
Yes, this is Europe, but the message about human relations goes for everywhere. And that is that when I was working with Subscania, we should set up a production site somewhere in Europe. There were 3 countries competing: UK, France, and Spain. In the beginning, we had a list of some 10, 12 countries, and then the short list were those 3 countries. And then, it's very difficult to make a decision because one country has got some advantages, some disadvantages, another some advantages, and so on and so forth. So it's quite, the competition is quite narrow. And that is very often the case. The competition is very narrow when you want to attract. Okay, we had the CEO for the automotive section saying to the board that, okay, we have got these three cases, these three countries. UK giving no incentives, Spain giving incentives. Anyway, and then, you know, what should the board say? Very difficult for the board to say you should establish there or there. So they said to the CEO of the automotive operation, what is your recommendation? Where do you want to invest? Where do you want to have your plan for the future? And he said, I want to have it in France. And he said, why do you want to have it in France? Because in France we got the very best personal reception. It was a question of human relations, where they gave everything to guide, to support, to build a partnership, to be long-term. So when you are evaluating different cases like that, okay, you are very objective, rational, up to a certain point. But then in the end of the day, it's very often, fortunately one could also say, the human factors which decide.
Yes,
I can only emphasize that, and I can only concur with that. Totally true. We had a similar experience building a factory in France, speaking to various regions within France, and we're sort of on paper leaning towards the border region. There was one guy in the IPA for Champagne-Ardenne who was really putting in an effort. He was really trying to solve all of our problems, and at the end we sort of ended up investing in Champagne-Ardenne. Because investing in a foreign country is a certain risk, and if you have the sense that the opposite number really understands your problem, is really solving your problem, very much this idea of the reception, we ended up there, and I think they cannot emphasize it enough. It's the know-how, it's the relationship. It's if as a business person you have the sense that on the other side of the table there is not a civil servant, but another business person who really understands you. That goes such a long way in making the decision easier for you.
thank you, Martin and Kai. So basically, to emphasize that, when all things are equal in terms of the competitive business environment, yes, incentives can sort of play a role as sort of the icing on the cake for an investor to make a final decision. But I think it's also important to highlight that any investment decision, the final decision, is the human factor, the gut feeling, what feels well, what feels comfortable. And in the many projects that the gentlemen here have emphasized and that we've coordinated, it has always been the human factor and the entrepreneur behind it that make the decision. It is not the mathematics, the Excel spreadsheets that make the initial decision. It's the gut feeling that is very important in these investment decisions. I think that is important to highlight, and their incentives can be the icing on the cake.